panicking about looking forward, but it's important to take time to look back and count your blessings. And so the first thing that we're going to do is Nancy's going to make a little presentation here, and I suppose Sparky's the recipient, although it's for the church.
Our main desire to be with you tonight is because we want to say thank you. We just feel overwhelmingly blessed with your faithful support of us over the years, that we have been partners together in what the Lord has done through His grace in Panama and Honduras and Nicaragua and other parts of the world, as He has allowed things to be used in other places. So this is a very Honduran thing to do. This is what Hondurans like to do when they say thank you. So this little plaque says, "Notice First Baptist Church. We thank God for you with joy because of your partnership in the gospel," from Philippians 1, 3, and 4. This is an expression of our deep gratitude to the church for your faithful support and encouragement in the ministry in Central America. So thank you very much. I hope you can find a little spot on the wall to put it. And we just can't express in words the gratitude we feel. Thank you.
Does anybody have a camera?
We were we were at a church in Boise on Sunday morning. It's now called Cornerstone, but it was the first church that took on part of our support when we had been appointed in November of 1978, and they started in January of 1979 and have continued to this day to support us. And that kind of faithfulness, I don't think that Notice started quite that early, but it's been a long time. And several of you we know from literally 50 years back, so I almost feel like I'm kind of a variety of the Antique Roadshow. But I'm the antique, and I don't know about the value, resale value, but anyway, we do want to remember some things, and we do thank you. Nancy shared some things last night, but we're going to leave some time at the end if there's questions, because sometimes, particularly if people have not known us, you may have questions that we will not have answered. When we went to candidate orientation in November of 1978, we thought we were going to Mexico. And there was an impression, at least one person here has told us they thought that we got together because somebody's mother was praying for us, that we would get together because they thought that Nancy wanted to be a missionary and that maybe I would be a missionary and we would go together. Well, we got together. But actually, when we got married, we didn't have missions in mind. Nancy had spent a year in the Ivory Coast teaching at a missionary children's school. I'd spent some time in Mexico, and we came back and thought that where God had us was in ministry in a local church in Caldwell. Caldwell First Baptist was my home church. And so when we went to candidate orientation, we thought we were going to Mexico because God had closed doors, and we ended up going to candidate orientation because somebody in Mexico sent us an application for the mission out of order, and they did not send the information about all the needs in all the countries, and so the only we knew about was Mexico, where I'd been. And the board said, "Why do you want to go to Mexico?" And well, this is all we know about. And they said, "Oh, how's that?" Well, somebody in Mexico had sent us an application without following the protocols. And they said, "Well, based on your application and experience, we want you to consider going to Panama." Well, we knew where Panama was, but had given not one thought to what the situation was in Panama, and had no knowledge of the needs. So they said, "We want you to pray about it." And you need to realize, this is what the board said to us. They said, you need to realize that if you accept an assignment to go to Panama, you will probably come home totally discouraged and defeated in less than 4 years. How's that for encouragement from a mission board to say, you'll probably won't even make it 4 years and you're going to crash and burn. Now, I don't know if they saw that on our resume or whatever, but they said the needs that we have there, we see that you have some experience. Because I'd spent a lot of time in prison ministry in Oregon. They specifically said that that was really good training for Panama. So, so we prayed about it. We finally went back and we said, well, we trust your judgment. You know the fields, you know the needs better than we do. And if you feel that that's what we should do, we'll go for it. And then we were appointed. Churches started getting on board and basically left for language school in March of 1980. Some of you do not remember that. Left for language school in March of 1980, and we were in the States in March of 2020 because of the birth of another grandchild. We were still working in Honduras, but we came for the birth of a grandchild in March of 2020, and we were on our way back to Honduras when Honduras shut down because of COVID, and we could not go back. I mean, they canceled the flights, closed the airports, canceled whatever. So basically, 40-year period between leaving for language school and then being trapped in the United States, because we came for 3 weeks, and everything we owned was in Honduras. So, well, apparently Lord shut the door, and so we need to do some rethinking. But in that period of time, we saw God working. I'm not going to repeat everything that Nancy said. We saw God's hand in many opportunities. We saw the devil's hand in some things too. But we're grateful for the fact that we lasted longer than 4 years, because we wouldn't be here tonight if we hadn't. I was at my 50th graduation anniversary at Corbin University last week, and it was interesting to talk to people and see what has happened to people that I graduated with. Some have pretty much gone into the ministry they expected to. I was not expecting to be a missionary when I graduated. But others have crashed and burned spiritually. Others have wrestled with tremendous health issues of different types, either themselves or the couple or their families or their kids or whatever. And it was interesting to share stories about God's provision and God's grace. And it was a time of looking back and then thinking about all the things that have happened and about how God's hand has been present even in moments when we didn't see it at the moment. God's hand was there. In the situation of the actual presentation at that graduation, the fellow that's now the interim president of Corbin spoke. I think we heard it 3 times. He told 3 different groups the same thing. Our group, the chapel students, the same thing. And he talked about the story in the book of Joshua about the stones of remembrance, and about how Israel was supposed to basically make a monument to reflect what God had done during that time in the desert, God's provision and the liberation from Egypt and all that kind of thing. So we didn't get it carved in stone. It's in wood, but it's kind of a remembrance because the church here has been faithful in participating for decades, literally. We're monthly. They have supported us. And the way it reads it on the plaque, it's for your participation in the ministry of different types in Honduras, and we couldn't have done it without you. You were actively participating, but it's like working at a distance. You familiar with that concept now? You're working at a distance with helping other people do things. There's been some really wonderful things that have happened, and the neat thing is we were transitioning. We were talking about coming back by mid-2021 to, quote, retire. And so I'd actually been turning some responsibility over to people before we left on that trip. And you know, the work has gotten along fine without us. We'd worked for years to train people, and they're doing what we worked with them to be prepared to do. So I had said for years, I want to leave when people still want us to stay. I don't want to stay to the point where they wish that we would have gone. That's maybe some of you can relate to that in circumstances where some people overstay their welcome. And the fact of the matter is that in the work in Honduras, particularly where we were at the end, there's national leadership that can start churches, they can train pastors, they can run a mission agency, a mission sending agency. We don't have to be there. Now, in some cases, we're still consulted by certain individuals, but basically the point was to prepare people, and that comes around to the idea of making disciples. And one of the things that struck me at the 50th anniversary in Corbin was that three of us were standing around talking afterwards. One of the fellows who was a good friend, who actually came to the celebration of our graduation, he took a very radically different course, kind of like what you said we were going to do tonight. He's been a Foursquare pastor, and he's been involved with the Vineyard and a whole bunch of other big groups. And he says, you know, the problem with them and with many other churches is they're not making disciples. They're not seeing people come to a maturity in Christ where they know what he commanded and they do it. They may have participated in a program, and they may have created institutions, but they're not making disciples. And even this fellow that has been involved in some of these churches that are internationally known, he said, yeah, they have tremendous programs, and they have thousands of people come every Sunday, but they're not making disciples. And the point is that Jesus said in the commission, this is what's supposed to happen. By God's grace, a lot of the people that we had a chance to work with in Honduras and in Nicaragua, and so continue in Panama, although we left there in 2001, there are people who love the Lord and who are faithfully carrying forward the work. So I just wanted to kind of put that in there, because where we're living right now, in Union City, Indiana, we were invited to go there by our oldest son, Luke. Some of you have met Luke. He's an Air Force Reserve chaplain with a unit out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so he has military duty every month on base. And he was having a terrible time finding anybody to fill in for him that could do the English and the Spanish service. And he said that other churches would send him people a pulpit supply, and they'd come and talk about space aliens or conspiracy theories or just about anything but Scripture. And so they ask us to go back and work with them because we can do both the English and the Spanish part of it. The other thing is about that is that just for your information, other people had told us, when you retire, you'll go back to these churches and you will have been a part of their missions budget for 30 or 40 years, but you've not been part of their lives. And we know people that have come back to the States, maybe they translated the Bible in New Guinea or someplace, and they come back, and I'm thinking of a particular couple, not too far from here, that came back after successfully completing the translation of the Bible in another part of the world, and they are lost because they don't fit. They're in a church, but they're not part of people's lives. So in a situation where we are, the church has really been struggling. It's in Darke County, Ohio. It's right on the border with Indiana, D-A-R-K-E. It is the darkest place spiritually I think we've ever worked. And we've been some dark places. 2 years ago, it led the United States of America, that county, in the number of opioid overdose deaths It was the highest rate in the nation. And people and families are so broken by drugs and whatever. There are a few people in the congregation that actively consider themselves not disciples of Christ, but first they're hillbillies. And that's where their identification comes. Now, true, they're relatively new believers, and we're hoping that they will get the vision of what it means to be a disciple of Christ, someone who is committed to learning what he commanded and doing it. But there were people in the church, when Luke was called almost 10 years ago, they didn't really paint an accurate story about what the situation was in the church. And there were some people there that had been in the church for some time, but they wanted to control it. But they were nasty people. Now, I had one woman that's been in the church for 40 years comment publicly in Sunday school. She says, I still invite people to church here, but people still tell me I'm never going to go to that church because of what somebody who was a leader in the church did to them 20 or 30 years ago. And instead of having a history of showing God's grace, and that was one of the things Nancy emphasized last night, that God has called us to be administrators of God's grace. What happened that people were defending their turf, and if somebody a little bit strange came in, it was like, what are you doing here? Or why are you dressed that way? You're not acceptable. It was somebody that was looking for God, but these people were more successful in driving people away from the gospel than they were in bringing people into communion with Christ in a community and helping them grow. So you can continue to pray for us because we have a new ministry in that area around that church. It's Luke's endorsement for the being chaplain is Southern Baptist. He graduated from Southern Seminary in Louisville. He's not a Southern Baptist. He would probably fit really well here. He's not a Southern Baptist in the sense that I'm a Southern Baptist first, like this other person says I'm a hillbilly first. Because there are people in town that the main thing that characterizes them is their denomination, not the fact that they're followers of Christ. And there may be people like that here too, that are so proud of their organization or so committed to a particular line of thought or whatever, that they're not really as a priority people that are committed to following Christ, and demonstrating his grace and having compassion on the lost. There are people that can share the gospel in an offensive way and actually drive people away, and that's part of the history of the church. But we're not discouraged. The Southern Baptist leadership for that region have told him, just close the church. Seriously, they just said, just close it. For you and your family's sake, just shut it down. There are people there who have been believers, in some cases for 40 years, and they're actively involved, they're actively giving, but because of this history, there are not a lot of new people that are coming in to get involved. The types of hymns that we sang tonight, they're great, but for people that come out of abuse and drugs and all that kind of stuff, it's such a cultural gap that it doesn't speak to them. I think they can learn to grow into that, but it's not the first step where they come in. I suggested, well, we could have some home Bible studies. No. People will not meet in other people's homes for anything. It's rare. I've never heard of anything like that. We talk to people in Oregon or Washington or Idaho, and that's one of the basic things that you do is you have small groups, and there they don't. We had a couple eat supper with us about a month ago. This last Monday night, it would have been probably 4 weeks. And the fellow told me yesterday, he said, we've been in this church for 40 years, and this is the first time that anybody's ever invited us for dinner. So there's an isolation. If any of you remember Jim Jones, who had a situation of a massive suicide with his followers in, was it Guyana? Or, he started about 15 miles from where we live. And there is a propensity on the part of people to believe and follow all kinds of things that doesn't have anything to do with Scripture. There was another pastor not too long ago that had 3 bodies in the church, and he was going to raise them from the dead. Well, that never happened. The police finally came in and took the bodies and whatever, but there are people that follow almost any kind of craziness, but without any discernment. And they would say they're Christians, probably, but they'll follow, but they don't do what Christ commanded. Christ didn't say save bodies at the church and raise them from the dead. That wasn't something in the basic commands. So we're living in a culture there where people are really broken. We're not giving up. We think that there are opportunities to reach people. Probably what's going to happen, and a number of people have encouraged us to consider this, including at this graduation thing. He said, just shut down for a few months. We're not going to actually totally quit, but we're going to revamp and restart and try to work things where we can reach people effectively that are totally unchurched. One person that talked to me, within a couple weeks before we left, said they were talking to a woman, I think she was 39. She didn't know who Jesus was. A lady in town, and she did not know who Jesus was. Now, maybe she has a few issues, but Nancy did a little event before Easter with a Hispanic family that has 3 girls, and these little girls are 1st grade, 2nd grade, and 4th grade. They'd never heard the resurrection story. Even though they're a Hispanic family, they'd never heard of the resurrection, had no idea what was related to Easter. So it's a situation that's a challenge. One of the most recent arrivals in the Spanish service is a woman who's Peruvian. She's here legally. There are hundreds of Hispanics there, but they're all mainly illegal. And, the pork and chicken industry, turkey industry would shut down in the United States if it wasn't for illegal people, because North Americans won't do that kind of work. I mean, there are hundreds there. And we have some neighbors that live just beside our house. I take them to the grocery store on Saturdays. Didn't last Saturday because I wasn't there. But they had at one point they had 17 men from their little town in Chiapas there in Union City. Now, I don't know how they get across the border, but there's work. They need people to do the work. And so people are migrating in vast numbers. But this one woman is from Peru, and there was a young woman, maybe about 18, that had worked at one of these chicken processing plants that worked with her and invited her to church. And basically the only contact she'd had with the gospel was with some Adventists in New Jersey. And then she moved to Union City, and she came to church, and she was married to an Egyptian Muslim. And she got to the point where she couldn't handle that, so they got divorced. She has a little boy that is theirs, the fellow that she's divorced from. She's bringing him to church, and she's dreading the day that her ex-husband finds out that she is taking him to a Christian church, because he'll try to take him away from her. But it's been fascinating to have her sit through lessons out of Genesis, because Luke happens to be teaching out of Genesis. And the last Sunday we were there, it was about when Jacob and Laban were sorting out what are they going to do with all these wives and families, and what's the deal here. She says that's the way most of the world lives today. And it was like she was reliving her story out of the book of Genesis, and most of us wouldn't equate anything of our experience to. She said, man, this is exactly how life is for billions of people around the world. So there are people like that have lots of issues and lots of struggles, lots of temptations, and we're called to make disciples out of people like that. Actually, we're called to work with God so that God can change their hearts and make disciples. You can continue to pray for us because that's the kind of ministry that we're involved in to some degree. We heard about a game that was played last night about the soapberry, pin the soapberry in Honduras. Nancy really liked that. And Nancy probably spent 80 hours in April finishing 2 separate sets of materials for use by women in Honduras, and in one case in Cuba. One of the things I'd like to ask you to do as a church, pray for the church in Nicaragua and Cuba. The political situation there has gone south, or it's bad. Basically, people in Nicaragua have said they don't want to have a lot of contact with us because if the government finds out that they're talking to North Americans, there's a level of suspicion that goes with that they don't really need. But they're faithfully serving the Lord, and they're faithfully leading the work. And it's interesting that we taught multiple events in Nicaragua on the theme of being peacemakers. And of course, Nicaragua had a civil war, and that was a very real issue. There were still hurts and pain because of the civil war. And in the case of Cuba, Cuba has shut the door to people who have been going over the years for ministry. They cannot go in person. So Nancy's working with a woman in Colombia, one in Guatemala, and one in Honduras, and they're writing materials for use in Cuba, which you can send in by the internet. So we have to go back to Honduras next month for a couple weeks to wrap up some things. We finally got all our stuff shipped back in November of last year. We got stuck here in March of 2020, and we got our stuff here November of last year, which was an adventure. But the very real likelihood is that Nancy will continue to write materials. She's been doing it for years, and so that kind of working at a distance, yeah, we're retired, but we're not done yet, and that kind of thing. One of the areas that does everybody here know what a soapberry is? Okay, no hands. All right, I won't ask for any. You don't know what a soapberry is? Okay, does anybody not know what a soapberry is? You can be a Christian and not know. Okay, soapberry is a fruit that grows on a tree, and it's hypoallergenic, and there's experts here that know how to use it. It has all kinds of uses besides just washing your body. A lot of people, our son Luke also has a little company that imports soapberries from Honduras, and most of his clients, it's the only kind of soap they can use because they have allergies related to everything else. And we got into that, probably 10 or 12 years ago. We're still members of a research group of the National University with regard to that because they see it's something that can help Honduras, so that's going to be a continuing thing. Next month, we'll sign papers to pass it over to a gentleman who is an agricultural missionary. We've known his family for years. He's been at our home and has known what the business is about, and he has the same vision for helping rural families. Now, we've seen several homes where people they're supporting a child with compassion, and I'm not saying anything negative about that. We have tremendous admiration for the people that coordinate compassion in Honduras. Our project it doesn't send money directly to the child, but it helps their parents support their kids. And it's needed both directions because many parents that don't have access to or can't plant soap berries can't support their kids through that. So part of being at Corbin is that Corbin, does everybody here know what Corbin University is? You're all Christians? Okay. Uh, part of what we did while we were at Corbin, they're going to start an agriculture program this year. And so we've been talking to them for several months. And the woman that heads it up is, her husband is a farmer. He raises grass seed at Salem. And so I'd said, you know, this is really good for controlling slugs. I mean, it's good for mosquito repellent, and it's good for hunters because it doesn't leave any odor in their clothes, and there's all kinds of applications for it. But I said it's good for controlling slugs. So she and her husband did an experiment. This is this new agricultural research or education program. And he brought some slugs, and she made a little bit of extract with soap berries, and they sprinkled the extract on the slugs, and they bubbled up and died. And she said his only words were, "How soon can you get this on the market?" Because it's an organic control solution, economically viable, and it's not available without some kind of further study that will validate in the way that the FDA will accept it. So we're going to be working on that with the idea of helping people in Honduras, and there's a dozen other applications that I won't explain. So we phased out our active involvement in terms of being personally in Honduras, but we're still involved with a lot of people. People have written to us about a number of different projects that are going on there, and we're working with people. And the thing is, I explained the reason why we ended up in Indiana is because we had an invitation to be involved in ministry there. And because of our background and experience, there weren't that many people that could just plug in. I want to say this, and then I'll open it up for questions. I've asked a number of people that are in the church, this struggling church, because a lot of the older members are dying off. And people that have come in the last few years, I say, why are you here? And it's because he teaches the Word. He teaches Scripture, our son, as the pastor. And the problem is that in many churches, they're not teaching the Word now. They're, I don't know, I'll make you feel good, or I will whatever. But they're not teaching the Word in a way that creates people who turn into disciples of Christ. So we feel blessed with that. But in looking back, as we started with the plaque, we are grateful to you for your support over the years, because we couldn't have done it without you. And you were actively participating at a distance, but we're grateful for your participation. So, any questions? Or have I totally intimidated you? How did the cashew thing go forward? What'd you say? We tried, but there were some legal situations as far as the export that we never found anybody that we were busy with the soapberry thing, and we couldn't take on more than what we already had with other teaching and writing and whatever that we were doing. We just had to say no to some things. That still is a potential. Yesterday we got a note from a pastor that we've worked with and known for, probably from the first year that we got to Honduras, or maybe the first, 20 years ago we've known him. And he wrote and he said he was been involved in a church plant in Cihuatepeque, central Honduras. And he said prices in the last few months have just skyrocketed. The situation in Ukraine is affecting Honduras already. I mean, it's affecting people here too, but they're seeing uh, the matter of climate change and crop production is hurting. So he said, we've been making, what do you call rosquillas? Okay, it's like a little hard donut that you dip in coffee. It's not sweet. It's a very Honduran thing. Okay. Okay, so he wrote to us and he said, "Is there anybody that would want to import them? They've been selling them in Honduras." And so this just came yesterday morning or day before yesterday, and say, "Is there anybody that you know of that maybe would want to work with importing some of this?" Well, we're up to our above our eyebrows with other things. Uh, but there are urgent needs, but people are living with stresses. Ministry are living with stresses uh, that are very difficult. Uh, and any questions? I can't believe I answered everything. The answer is yes. Uh, at a national level, at a regional level, at a local church level, there's good leadership that work together. It's not. There's nobody with a messianic complex that I'm aware of where this one person is what the work depends on. They, I think, have captured the idea that with different gifts and abilities and experience, that they need to work together. Related to what you talked about last night with the women about God has given us all gifts and we're supposed to be administrators of the grace of God according to the areas where He's given us capacity to serve. So uh, the uh, the answer to that is yes. There's structure at a national, regional, local level, and I think that it's godly leadership that people are trying to work together to do what's best for the work. It's been really hard because of the number of people that have come illegally to the U.S. You know, if you're in a country town and 2/3 of the men have left, what do? It's hard, but they're trying to stay faithful to Scripture. Well, if you don't have any other questions, is there anything else I should have said? There's still a need for missionaries around the world. I think Honduras is a country where there isn't so much need to just have mountains of people go. There are a lot of people that go on work teams and short-term things. That can be good under certain circumstances, but in some cases it keeps the national church from fulfilling its responsibility. It's easier to have the gringos come and do it than to trust the Lord and work to do it yourself. I'm not saying that it's never appropriate, but you have to be capable or careful about it. Uh, Around the world, there are needs for people to go into countries that are closed to traditional missions. And the idea of the Soapberry Project and the idea of helping people use resources that they have to benefit themselves and help themselves can be a key for getting into countries where they're not open to a Christian missionary coming. So we know for example, people from Central America that have gone as missionaries. And Central Americans can go places as missionaries that a North American can't because of the passport issue. So the world of missions has changed. There's still a need for people to be involved and be willing to go, but it's probably not going to be in the traditional capacity in many parts of the world that we had, in terms of being the gringo missionaries and whatever, and being known to be evangelicals. And in our case, I'll use this business as mission idea, and it's growing in emphasis. When we started off with the Soapberry Project, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have any training to do anything like that. But somebody at the National University heard about it, and the National University asked us to go be a member of the research group at the National University. And they didn't care that we didn't have it, because we were working with people that did have the scientific capability. The Chamber of Commerce in Tegucigalpa heard what we were doing, and they said, come be involved in our training program. And we resisted. They were helping people know how to start up business. We already had started up a business. Well, that's part of the reason why they wanted us there. And so we got a $5,000 prize from the Chamber of Commerce for the business, because it was innovative in helping people use resources that otherwise weren't being used. And those kinds of things, God can open doors that way. That God can open doors if we're thinking, okay, what are the options? What are the alternatives? What are the entryways to help people? So for the young people that are here, especially if you're interested in agriculture or farming, forestry, whatever, they say that there are about 300,000 species of plants in the world, and about 3,000 of them have been studied and are taken advantage of. And there are all kinds of traditional products in Congo. I'm sure that there's a multitude of traditional products that if somebody could go in and help people learn how to use the resources they have, it would open doors. And you could get in if you have that kind of training and background and have opportunity to share the gospel by serving people and by sharing the grace of God in that kind of context. And so you can pray about that. The world has changed in the last 50 years. And it continues to change. And it might change a lot in the next 5 months. But the opportunities are still there. And the church, you know your people here. There might be somebody here that would be a really good candidate to do some kind of creative ministry in some country that's closed to traditional missions. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, it's a blessing to have you back with us. Thank you for taking time to be with us tonight. For those of you that would like to be a blessing to John and Nancy, even though they're just with us a short while and then heading back to Honduras and back to ministry, I told you they weren't really retired. They just use the term, but they really aren't done. There is an offering plate on the back table there. If you would like to make a love offering, you can drop it there. I invite all of you to stay and visit, get to know them a little bit better. We've got some tables set up down in the primary Sunday school area, so please stay and join us. And I'm going to ask Pastor Cleve if you would just close us in a word of prayer and just a special blessing for John and Nancy.